Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. My name is Cheryl Dugan. I am Laudato Si Movement's Program Manager for Asia Pacific. On behalf of the Laudato Si Movement, we welcome you all to this special Season of Creation session on divestment, the road to a net zero emission future in Asia and Oceania. I am your host today, and joining us from India is my co-host, Sister Prema Chowanur from the Sisters of the Cross of Shavanod. This session will be translated, this will be conducted in English, but we will have simultaneous translations to Korean and Indonesian. And to access the translations, you have to click the interpretation button. If you see the Earth icon at the bottom of the screen, please click that one. And then a list of languages will show up. And to access the Korean translation, if you speak Korean, please select Korean language. And then to access Indonesian, you will have to select Japanese. Zoom has limited list of countries, so please bear with this. And but not to worry, you will hear Indonesian translation. So let's take a minute for those who speak Korean and speak Indonesian to do this. And we will start our session, of course, with an opening prayer. And I would like to call on Sister Prema to lead us. Sister Prema.
Yes. So, creator of all, we are grateful that from your communion of love, you created our planet to be a home for all. By your holy wisdom, you made the earth to bring forth a diversity of living beings that filled the soil, water, and air. Each part of creation praises you in their being and cares for one another from our place in the web of life. With the psalmist, we sing your praise, that in your house, even the sparrow finds a home, the swallow a nest for herself, that she may lay her young. We remember that you call human beings to keep your garden in ways that honor the dignity of each creature and conserve their place in the abundance of life on earth. But we know that our will to power pushes the planet beyond her limits. Our consumption is out of harmony and rhythm with the earth's capacity to heal herself. Habitats are left barren and lost. Species are lost and systems fail. Where reefs, sand burrows, mountain tops, and ocean deeps once teemed with life and relationships, wet and dry desert lie empty, as if uncreated. Human families are displaced by insecurity and conflict, migrating in search of peace. Animals flee fires, deforestation, and famine, wandering in search of a new place to find a home, to lay their young and live. In this season of creation, we pray that the breath of your creative word would move our hearts as in the waters of our birth and baptism. Give us faith to follow Christ to our just place in the beloved community. Enlighten us with the grace to respond to your covenant and call to care for our common home. In our tilling and keeping, gladden our hearts to know that we participate with your Holy Spirit to renew the face of your earth and safeguard a home for all. In the name of the one who came to proclaim good news to all creation, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Again, a warm welcome to everyone to this special Season of Creation learning session from Laudato Si Movement in Asia Pacific. Pope Francis was clear in Laudato Si in saying that technology based on the use of highly polluting fossil fuel needs to be progressively replaced without delay. And Laudato Si Movement responded by launching its Catholic Divest, Reinvest program to encourage Catholic institutions to divest from fossil fuel companies and invest only in socially and ethically responsible companies that do not cause harm to people and to the environment. To date, nearly 400 religious institutions have committed to divest. And in November last year alone, following the release of Vatican's first ever comprehensive environmental guidelines, 47 faith-based institutions committed to divesting from fossil fuels, marking the largest ever joint divestment announcement by religious leaders in history. So today's learning session will help us understand what the recent global reports mean to our continents, to Asia and Oceania, and to understand the why, what, and how of divestment, and to share and learn from the experiences of Catholic institutions in the region in divesting from fossil fuel industry and reinvesting in renewable energy. So this session will go as follows. First, we will listen to all the presentations, and then we will have the space for questions after all the presentations. Once again, we thank our resource speakers for joining us today, for finding time for us today, and we thank everyone for being here with us and for learning with us. So with that, I welcome you all. And may I call on Sister Prema to introduce our first speaker.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. And I have the joy of introducing Alessandro Blissey. Mr. Alessandro Blissey serves as the special advisor to the executive director at the International Energy Agency in Paris. In this role, he supports and provides strategic advice to the executive director on several activities of the IEA. He also has responsibility for maintaining relationships with the private sector. Prior to taking up his current role, he served as Senior Policy Officer in the IEA's Economics and Investment team, co-leading the work of IEA's World Energy Investment publication. Before that, he was a member of the IEA's annual World Energy Outlook publication. Prior to joining the IEA, he worked for the Italy's Prime Minister Office, World Energy Council, and the INI Group. Alessandro was born in Bologna, Italy, and has a Bachelor of Marine Geophysics honors from the University of Bologna and a Master's in Energy Resource Management. So we have such a great person with a great experience here to share his experiences and knowledge. Welcome, Alessandro Blissey.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thanks very much for the invitation and for the kind introduction. I hope you can hear me well. And
Yes.
Speaking to all of you from IEA headquarters, which is based in Paris. So we have the sun rising now here, and a pleasure to join. For those that are not familiar with the International Energy Agency, it is an intergovernmental organization with members across all the OECD countries. So basically North America, almost all Europe, and then Australia, Japan, Korea. But we have, under the leadership of Dr. Birol, my executive director, we have also developed strong ties and association relation with all the major emerging economies, including China, India, Thailand, Indonesia, South Africa, Morocco, Brazil, and so on. What IEA does, IEA look at global energy markets, all fuels, all technologies, and since almost 2 decades has also developed a serious and intense program as far as concern other very important energy-related topics, including energy access, which is still a big issue in many parts of the world, as well as climate change. This year, the IEA has developed a new backgrounding analysis, which is called the Net Zero Report, Net Zero by 2050 roadmap, which basically try to depict what is needed to do in the energy sector to achieve our common global goals. Now, why all this emphasis on energy sector? The point is that basically climate change and climate challenge is fundamentally an energy challenge, because about 80% of the emission we emit, which have impact on our climate of the planet, comes from the energy sector. So the first message, the key point is, if we do not fix the energy sector, we cannot fix the climate challenge. But why a report on net zero now? This report basically is due to 2 main pillars. From one side is that we have, since this year, finally, unprecedented political momentum, alignment. We have seen countries and governments responsible for more than 70% of the global emission that have committed or have put forward plans to achieve net zero by 2050 or carbon neutrality by 2060 in case of China. At the same time, we also have some good news on technology side, because learning by doing many new modern technology like renewable wind and solar have moved from the stage of being a sort of romantic story, because being in the market essentially for subsidies or support, to being competitive, to become cheap, to become a concrete option that can walk on their legs only. And the second main reason to do this report is because all of us know, also the Father Pope mentioned, and is making a lot of moral pressure on this, rightly so. The climate change is probably the biggest challenge that the humankind has to face. And this is something that is not IEA saying, it's the scientist, and we believe as a scientist, and we believe in the need to fix this. Now, when it comes to climate, the starting point is that basically we are on the same boat, all of us. It doesn't matter if you are in Paris, it doesn't matter if you are in Jakarta or in Manila or in Santiago del Chile. We are all in the same boat, and we need essentially to move fast in what we call the race to net zero. But the point is, this is a race in which not all countries start from the same point. Not countries are equal when it comes to their historic contribution or current contribution to climate change. Not all countries have the same means and the same responsibility. This is very important to keep in mind as a starting point. The second starting point is this is a race, but it's not the typical concept of race. So it's not a race among countries. It's a race against time. And the third one is that or we have everyone that is a winner, or no one is going to be a winner. So in other words, is if not all countries finish the race, no one is going to win the race. Now, today there is more focus on Asia, and to give the differences, when we look, for instance, at the current global energy mix of some very important countries, like, for instance, China, India, Indonesia alone. These three countries are more or less responsible or more or less home to about half of the entire world population. But when we look at their energy consumption, we see that these three countries have their energy mix relying for more 60% coming from coal. So there is a long way to do on this. Of course, this country is different, as I mentioned, responsibility, and this country comes from a different level of contribution in terms of climate change, especially when we look at India, Indonesia, when we look at Philippines and so on. And their emission per capita is very low once compared to places like Europe or Canada or the United States and so on. But at the end of the day, and I go back to the concept that all the world needs to consider this as a common challenge which we have to move, 1 ton of CO2 going to atmosphere from Washington or from Beijing or from Libya or from Russia has the same effect on all of us. Or in other words, emissions have no passport. So we really need to work together on this to achieve the common goal, considering the different starting point and helping the emerging economies through different mechanisms that I will mention in 1 minute. Now, our roadmap to 2050, what we have to make, basically. This is a very, very complex job. This is a very, very difficult job to achieve. Net zero by 2050 has to be recognized as a premise. But basically, we have 3 main things to do. The first one is that we need, in the current decade, to make the best use of all technologies we already have, the clean technologies we already have. As I mentioned, renewables has become an important component and an important economy option of our global energy mix, and we need to push this as much as possible into our power sector, trying to decarbonize it in a way to provide electricity without generating all the emission. The power sector alone is responsible of about 40% of the emission that we completely emit. And at the same time, we need to move from the clean side of the power generation to a more use of electricity in the final end user sector. So in transport, in industry, in the buildings, and so on. This is the first job we have to do. The second job is to push innovation and technology very, very strongly. Our analysis showed that about half of the emission reduction we needed to achieve our net zero goal need to come from technologies that today are not yet commercially deployed on the market. So we really needed to push innovation strongly to advance in a series of technologies that are fundamental to decarbonize end-use sector industry. Just to make an example, when you look at steel and cement, the production of steel and cement is something extremely energy intensive and contributing significantly to the CO2 emission. About 15% of the global emission comes from producing steel and cement, which are at the backbone of our urbanization process, our society. But today, you cannot use electricity to produce steel and cement because you need much higher temperature. So you have to rely on fossil fuel. Developing new technologies, one example is hydrogen, and so on, you can move into the direction of decarbonizing also those sectors that today is very difficult to decarbonize. So the second job is innovation and technology deployment. And the third job, very important, is a strong decline of fossil fuel consumption. Coal, first of all, oil and gas. Now, all of these things mentioned are quite a big job, are not very easy to do, otherwise probably we have already done, and requires a lot of efforts. Our roadmap identifies 400 different milestones from now to 2050 of measures or concrete measures that we needed to pursue to achieve this goal. For instance, the first thing is, as of this year, we shouldn't build any further unabated coal plants. Or another example is by 2030, 60% of the sales of new cars should be electric. Today is 5%. We should move to 60. Or another example, a sector that as of today relies almost for 100% on fossil fuel, aviation. We need by 2040 to have at least 50% of the fuels used in aviation coming from sustainable fuels, can be biofuels, can be synthetic fuels and so on. So we have 400 of these measures. And if these measures working on demand, making more efficient, changing the use, pushing for new fuels works out, then we will have oil, gas, and coal demand decline substantially. So in this scenario, we would not need new investment in fossil fuel resources because the existing one will be enough to meet declining demand. Now, energy is a sector that as many sectors in the world, as many parts of the economic sectors, is something that has very strong interaction with policy choices, with regulation, and so on. But probably energy is a bit peculiar because we need energy all the time. For all persons that do not have reliable access to energy, the pain of such lack is pretty evident and is something that we need to overcome. So energy is a good thing. It makes the life more comfortable. It gives more possibility. It helps in education, medication, and so on. The problem is emissions. But to make energy system become reliable and to be properly kept, we need significant investment taking place. And when we speak a world of net zero, we also speak a world where the level of investment in dimension and in nature change completely. In our analysis, we need to scale up the amount of investment by several times to reach levels like 4 trillion of US dollar per year. And on top of that, the vast majority of the investment needed to be on clean fuel.
I am at the Zoom. I am
okay. And to make this happen, of course, we need the policies, we need the regulation, we need all the key stakeholders moving in the right direction. Honestly, the investors are going into the energy sector most of the time, if not all the time, for one simple reason: making money, making a profit out of it. But if the policymakers follow this pathway and provide an unmistakable signal to the investors that clean energy is going to be the predominant source and that is going to be the mainstream in our activities, this will make a clean energy prevail. And this will be a clear signal towards the investors that not moving outside this pathway, so maybe investing in fossil fuel resources, could be a risky activity, a risky business that could end up not being so lucrative as it would be the clean energy. This is the framework in which we are moving. And as I said, our report, which is freely available on the website and to be discussed, is explain every part in every technology, every sector, in every region much more in details. But I would like also to use this opportunity to mention other things that IEA has been doing, which I believe are particularly relevant. And the first one is about exactly translating all this intention into reality. Because if we want a clean energy transition with the aim to make our world, our planet more sustainable, taking climate change, but taking also pollution and other things, the first important job is to make sure that we are able to finance the clean energy transition in emerging and developing countries. For two main reasons. Number one, this is home to the largest part of the population in the world. And number two, because when we look at the normal scenarios, at the business usual trend, over 90% of the growth of the emission is expected to come from those countries in the world, from that part of the world. So or we are able to develop the clean energy transition, or we will not be able to achieve our goals. So how to finance clean energy transition? Now, when we look at US, Europe, and some part of the Asia, Japan, Korea, we have a little doubt that the financial system and the energy system and the regulation system will have a happy marriage. They will meet, they will deploy clean energy, big times and so on. But it's not always the same in some part of the emerging world. Just to give an example, interest rates in financing clean energy transition in some emerging countries are up 7 times more expensive than in places like US or Europe. So one of the things IEA has been doing has been also calling for governments to give international finance institutions a clear mandate to support the financing of new clean technologies in emerging countries and to unbottleneck all the current situation. Now, to conclude, there is one point which I believe is particularly relevant and therefore is particularly important, the initiatives like the one you organize in all this process, which is that, as I mentioned, the clean energy transition is complex and not easy job. It's something in which governments are probably very much in the driving seat. It's a technology race, it's economy race, all these kind of things. But at the end of the day, the clean energy transition will fail if it's not going to have public support. It will not be led by citizens, if will not be supported by citizens, if it will not be developed in a way that do not leave anyone behind. This is the reason why at the IEA we have also developed a very high-level commission, people-centered commission, to look at the social implication of a clean energy transition, what it means for jobs, what it means for the comfort of different communities around the world that relies more on the current energy system. Is a commission also in which we are honored to have also Cardinal Turkson actively participating. And we believe that reaching net zero is a very, very narrow pathway. It's a very, very difficult job, but still is achievable. And the involvement of all citizen movements and different corners of society is incredibly important to make this happen. Thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you very much, Alessandro, for providing us with the big picture and for highlighting the need on why we need to achieve net zero and what needs to be done, and of course, why we should support clean energy. And before we move on to our, just to mention again that you will have the chance to ask your questions at the end of all the presentations. Before we move on to our next speakers, I just want to announce that the next divestment announcement date is on October 26th, and we invite those who decide to divest to fill out a registration form, which we will be putting on chat later. Okay, so I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, a fellow Filipino, Jerry Arance. So Jerry is a long-term advocate of who has engaged governments, companies, and international and domestic finance institutions concerning the climate crisis and sustainability issues, and has worked with indigenous peoples, communities, and civic movements in tackling human rights and natural resources and mineral management issues. Today, his primary work concerns advancing energy transformation, ecological integrity, and people-centered development. As Executive Director of the Center for Energy, Ecology, and Development, and a convener of the Power for People Coalition and Withdraw from Coal campaign in the Philippines. Welcome, Jerry.
Good day to everyone. Magandang hapon for co-Filipinos who are in this webinar. Thank you for inviting me and my organization for us to be able to share our experience in terms of our divestment campaign in the country, as well as our campaign, general campaign to actually transform the power sector in the country. And it's really good to be presenting after our esteemed presenter Alessandro, who outlined the big picture in terms of the recent IEA report, and we actually really welcome it. And just to say, Alessandro, we've been using your report in terms of our engagement to raise ambition in our country. And part of our presentation actually alludes to your presentation as well. So I have a PowerPoint presentation. Can you see it? Yeah.
Yes.
So just to introduce my organization, see this young institution, but most of the people involved are long-time energy justice and energy transformation advocates in the country for almost 10 to 15 years now. So we do not just do research and advocacy work, engage governments, financial institutions, and international financial institutions actually, or engage the climate negotiations, but also do community work to enable communities across the country to transition as well with their own capabilities to be able to access renewable energy at the local level. And before after the IEA report, what really caught our eyes, the Filipinos' eyes, is the recent IPCC report on climate change, which basically outlines a very grim scenario. And this also validates many of the long-standing calls and demands of the Philippines for drastic and ambitious climate action globally, but also within the country. When we usually discuss climate change in the country, I always note on the impacts on our oceans because we're composed of more than 7,000 islands, and most of our vulnerable communities rely heavily on marine resources. And we cannot imagine losing 98% of our coral reefs at 2 degrees and be able to at least have 20 to 25% of our existing coral reefs at 1.5 degrees, much more 3 degrees, 4 degrees, 5 degrees. It's just a matter of life and death for the Philippines, notwithstanding the year-round ever-increasing droughts and ever stronger typhoons that we usually bear in terms of climate change impacts. So the IPCC report, the recent report, is just a red alert signal for the Philippines and Filipinos. And I think almost all of us Asians, particularly those that are very vulnerable or are located in very vulnerable areas, geographical areas in the region. And of course, for us, we in the Philippines, we would be reminded always of Typhoon Haiyan. And Typhoon Haiyan is just 0.8 degree global warming. So we really cannot fathom even a 1.5 degree world. So from our end, the ambition and the push for citizens to actively participate and actively demand for the government and for the international community for ambitious actions is really of utmost importance. And for recent times, it has really been clear from our end that ambitious climate action dictates that the world urgently needs to get away from dependence on coal, gas, and other fossil fuels. I think Alessandro have really outlined this in his presentation. I will not touch on this anymore. And this one as well, it's actually based on some of the findings by Carbon Tracker, which actually also touches on the recent IEA report, that the scenario or the pathways is really very slim. And thus the need for more ambitious actions from all countries. Notwithstanding, of course, even those countries that, like for example, the Philippines really has a very small contribution, historical contribution for greenhouse gas emission, historical greenhouse gas emission. But nevertheless, as Filipinos, we demand to our Philippine government that, you know, in order for the Philippine government to actually call for ambitious actions, it has to start at the home front. And thus, the stoppage of fossil fuel expansion here in the country and the rest of Asia, is 9 out of 10 coal-fired power plants that are in the pipeline. So that, you know, it compels us Asians to actually really engage our government and convince our government that this is not the path that our governments need to traverse and do. Of course, many of the Filipinos were actually very inspired by the visit of the Pope here in 2013, and eventually the release of the Laudato Si. And many inroads domestically have actually, you know, started and drawn inspiration from what Laudato Si have laid out. And of course, the fossil fuel expansion cannot proceed without the support or the impetus given by financiers, and that is where financing for transition, but also to limit the expansion of fossil fuel in our country and elsewhere is really critical. And engaging the financial sector is very important. Thus, the hastening of divestment is actually of utmost a very important element in our work. But the growing awareness of the role of financing and enabling the rise of fossil fuel has also pushed a lot of civil society organizations in the country to look at the projects that are being actually the financiers of these projects. And we were part of a global effort to actually come up with what is called right now as the Global Coal Exit List. It is a list of companies that are in the forefront of developing the massive coal expansion globally. And we have used this list to actually engage many financial institutions, whether it is international in its nature or even domestic companies such as the Philippines. Of course, I won't be touching on this. You would know more about this, but we are very inspired by the faith institutions' commitments and ongoing inroads in terms of moving away financing from the faith-based community away from fossil fuel. And so here in the Philippines, we are inspired by all these developments, and to keep that momentum, we've launched recently what we call as the Withdraw from Coal campaign in the country. And a major composition of this is mainly to put a highlight to the role of domestic banks in the country. It is based on our research, 60% of the actual financing of the coal expansion in the country came from domestic banks. So therefore, the importance of putting a lot of emphasis from our end to actually launch a campaign and direct a campaign towards convincing domestic banks to have clear policies is of utmost importance. And we've drawn a lot of examples globally, such as the EIB, AXA, and many others, HSBC, many Accredit Agricole, and many other institutions that have clear criteria in terms of policies to actually make a deeper inroad in terms of moving away money from fossil fuel and, of course, to renewable energy. So experience of the Philippine case is that we've seen a massive growth in the last decade. We were around only 4,000, close to 4,000 megawatts or 4 gigawatt in terms of our coal dependence before the start of the decade. Now we are at 10.94 or around 41% of the national total in terms of dependence on coal. If you add other fossil fuels such as oil and gas, it would be around almost 70% of our energy source is coming from fossil fuel. So there was an addition of 19 new coal-fired power plants. It is always this abuse from our on the side of our Philippine government that we argue that we have a small contribution to global emissions. But when it was ranked based on expansion, the actual expansion with around 13.3 gigawatt to 15 gigawatts, the Philippines ranked 7th in the biggest coal expansionist in the world in 2020. So while it is very vulnerable in terms of climate change, a small amount in terms of contribution to historical emission, but it is 7th in terms of global coal expansion globally. So it is significant in the sense that if we look at if all these coal plants are actually are actually built. So this is the rationale wherein most of the faith organization, particularly the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, the Association of Major Religious Superiors, and many other organizations, especially the civil society groups, banded together to actually look at who are financing this massive coal expansion in the country. And we saw that from 2000 to 2019, almost a decade, that around 15 Philippine banks funneled around 13.42 billion US dollars to actually support this massive expansion of coal plants in the country. And of the 15, 3 banks support coal, which is the Bank of the Philippine Islands, the Banco de Oro, Unibank, and the Philippine National Bank. And thus, when 2 years ago, with key bishops and with the impetus given by the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines and the AMRSP, we launched what is called as the Withdraw from Coal campaign, which basically targeted these 15 banks, but more so targeting and engaging at least one key bank or the top three banks who have financed tens of billions of dollars to the coal expansion in the country. The main campaign centered on what are the key policies of all the banks in terms of coal financing. And what we've seen is that no Philippine bank then in 2019 had actual policy on coal financing. So we drew a lot of learnings from all the victorious divestment campaigns from many other countries targeting their respective banks, especially in the and sort of pattern it in our context wherein we develop our own criteria with their respective exposure to coal, but also their current sustainability and climate policies of the 15 banks. And what was quite remarkable when we released what is called the Coal Divestment Criteria Scorecard, so we actually ranked many of these banks. And this actually fueled a lot of concerns, but also engagement with these banks, because they do not want to be put in the highlight that they're the ones behind the massive coal expansion in the country. So there were a lot of engagements with the top banks, particularly the Bank of the Philippine Island and many other banks who have eventually come up with their own respective policies. Here, we also clarified, because this is the biggest hurdle in the campaign vis-a-vis the Catholic churches in the country, is that when we say divestment, we actually clarified that we are not yet asking the archdioceses, the institutions of the Catholic to divest now, but to actually use our collective resources as leverage to compel the banks, the domestic banks, to actually have clear policies to move away from fossil fuel financing. The reason behind that is that all 15 domestic banks are actually involved in coal financing. So when we are asked by Catholic institutions or our dioceses, where do they move their money, their payroll, their investments, so on and so forth, we cannot find any other banks domestically to actually put our money, because all 15 banks, which are big banks, which does have the system that we would need in terms of our daily financial systems, are all involved in coal financing. So what we did was to actually clarify that, and we demand to these banks, and through many efforts, to actually compel them to come up with clear policies so that we move the banks away from financing coal plants. Coupled with this, of course, we launched public awareness, social media, and media targeting these banks and even their shareholders, but also their executives. And so many initiatives have actually been pursued around this campaign. And eventually, the first bank that came up with its policy, which was announced last year a week before we launched our what we call as the coal divestment scorecard, announced that they will no longer be financing coal, and that coal financing will end from the bank. It's the Rizal Commercial Bank of Rizal Commercial Bank Corporation. This was followed by the biggest announcement on Earth Day on April 22nd by the Bank of the Philippine Islands, which is the top financiers of coal in the country. This was a culmination of many efforts, particularly by shareholders coming from the Catholic Church, dioceses, and bishops who have sent letters to the officials, who have dialogue to the officials of the Bank of the Philippine Islands. And this was a historic moment, because this was the biggest financier of coal expansion in the country. And most of these efforts are and combined with the many resistance by communities in almost all coal-fired power plant projects in the country, culminated with an announcement of a coal moratorium in the Philippines. And consequently, the whole coal pipeline is now reduced to half and could be reduced down to just 2 gigawatts remaining by the end of the year. Unfortunately, this campaign have also forced the government not to tap into renewable energy, but we are now facing a new challenge, which is gas financing. And the government is seeing that gas will become a key ingredient in terms of the power sector to transition us towards renewable energy. But this would also mean that massive expansion on gas is now a key problem for the country. Just to show you the magnitude, from just 2 gigawatt of gas in 2016, we are now at 8 gigawatt and could be around 19 gigawatt in 2040. So that is the new challenge in terms of the gas expansion in the country. And so this is a continuing engagement, both by civil society and the church, include now to ensure that financing will actually go to renewable energy, which is bountiful in the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerry, for sharing the Philippine experience. And it's great to see how all the sectors are working together, especially the church in the campaign to withdraw from coal. Thank you, Jerry. And I'd like to call on Sister Prema to introduce our next speaker. Sister Prema? Okay, maybe she's not. I couldn't see her. So I will introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is from Australia. Sister Kate McPhee is a Marist sister in Sydney. She was born in Melbourne, Victoria, and was educated by the Marist sisters. After some years of working in the bank, she joined the Marist sisters in Sydney in 1983. After profession, she trained as a teacher and has been involved in secondary education in Sydney. She has also ministered with the Marist sisters in Mexico and Papua New Guinea and in Western Queensland, where she was involved in pastoral ministry. For many years, she served her congregation in its financial administration, both here and overseas. Currently, she oversees their congregational finances for their communities in Australia. Sister Kate.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cheryl, and it's nice to see so many lovely faces here. I'd like to firstly thank both Alessandro and Jerry for their words today, and support you, Jerry, in the work that you are doing in the Philippines, and are very conscious of the Philippines, the Philippine Islands, the nation of islands, and the effect that climate change has on your country, and also the countries of our Pacific neighbours here. My story, or our story, is a very simple story, and I'm here just to talk about what we've done as a congregation in relation to divesting from fossil fuels. So why divest? Our story actually began some years ago, and it was through our collaboration with other religious congregations, and as being one of the first members to join and support the Australian religious response to climate change, we became very aware, very aware of the need to make a difference in our world and to stop the mining of fossil fuels. We were encouraged both at our regional chapter and our general chapter to take up the challenge and to look at how we in our own units or our own countries can do something. So we were encouraged to look at our investments and to see how we can divest from fossil fuels. And we made our own statement here in Australia in 2015 that we were going to be working towards the process of divesting from fossil fuels. And of course, that same year was the year that Pope Francis gave us his encyclical Laudato Si. So it fitted in beautifully with where we were at and the whole church as a whole. So what are the strategies and actions that we took at this time? Well, firstly, we had to remain with our eyes open to the situation that was happening in the world, and especially in terms of fossil fuels. And as we heard Alessandro explain to us, that fossil fuels, we're exposed to fossil fuels everywhere in our daily life, through our transport systems, through the petrol we have in our cars, our electricity, as well as companies who are using fossil fuels for the production of their goods. So it's something that's out there and it's working. It's not just what's being mined in the ground. We're all using fossil fuels. So to divest from fossil fuels is not something you can do overnight. It is a progress. It's something that takes time, and we're learning that it takes a lot of time to move into it. One of the first things we decided was to get solar panels for our houses. And this has been great, apart from the fact that we do save money by having solar panels, and we do look forward, and unfortunately, and I think Alessandro commented on this, is the pricing of initiatives is quite high. So to buy a battery for the solar system we have, so we can become completely independent with our electricity, can be quite expensive. So we're still looking into that and seeing how we can move towards battery. The other area in which we felt that we could start to look at was our investments. Well, that this was part of the divesting from fossil fuels. Now, as I mentioned, we're only a very small congregation, so our investments weren't too much, but we thought, okay, we'll use what we've got and we'll make our little bit of a difference. So we basically had some money in managed funds and in term deposits. Now, just with managed funds to start with, managed funds are very, obviously someone is managing your money. And when that money goes into a big pool, they will use it accordingly to invest where they feel it's going to make the most money. So our investigation took us to communicating, and it's a constant conversation with managed funds, but first to look at their ESG policies, which is their environmental, social and corporate governance policies, because divesting from one thing also includes how these companies care for their employers, for the whole environment, their regenerating the environment in which they work as well. So that was the first point, and to make sure that they have got an ESG policy. And certainly a lot of managed funds through pressure are moving towards this. The next thing was to also put pressure on these managed funds, but as a little group, we can only advocate for the continuing divesting from using fossil fuels. Now, some managed funds are at a stage where they're saying that they will not divest in companies that make more, that make a greater profit than 10%, 20% in fossil fuels. So it's a start. They are starting to look at that way of trying to reduce their investments in fossil fuels. The other way, and we were spurred on by low interest rates, was to, of course, term deposits and everything started to lose out because our interest rates have gone down to 0.02 or something at the moment. So we started, one way that we could control or to manage our own funds was to look for financial advisors and investment advisors. And so that took time as well to investigate different groups and who would best suit us as investment advisors. We then changed our term deposits into these companies. This has been a wonderful experience and a great learning for me, because now working with these advisors, we're able to manage our own money without having all the knowledge, etc., of shares going up and shares coming down, etc., etc. It also gives us the opportunity to insert our own investment policy and have our advisors working from our policy, not their policy. And this is a great help. So, of course, we have divesting from fossil fuels. But we also not just have a whole lot of no's, we don't want this, we don't want that, which we do have, all the no's, but we also want it to be proactive. And so our proactive is to invest in new initiatives into renewable energy in our country. And so this is what we are working towards now. It is slow, and I think Alessandro made the point also that the initiatives are very slow coming, especially in terms of solar farms or wind mills, etc. We have the country for it. We have the sun, we have the wind. So it's just once again advocating and trying to help with these initiatives to happen. The other area in which I think is important too in some of the companies that we have invested in is looking at the other areas of our social life and well-being in the country, and that is investing in social housing, housing for the disabled, etc. So it takes us to that whole care of our human race and our common home, the place that we're all sharing, and that everyone has an equal right to it and an equal and that their dignity and rights are respected. So it's been great. In companies that we have invested in, we have all, before we make any decisions, we have asked for their ESG ratings also, so that we're up on their own ethical investments and etc. that they have. And one of the things about that is that the ESG ratings that a company produces, they are giving a rating, so which can rate from C, D, E, right up to AAA. Okay, as a congregation, we have made a thing that we will not invest in companies that have less than a BBB rating, so that we're sure that they are treating their employees with respect and dignity, and as well as the earth and the environment. We are trying to build gradually just a broad, ethical, sustainable portfolio. So what have been the challenges and the learnings for us as a group? To tell you the truth, I didn't know too much about investments before I started doing this. So it has been a real huge learning curve over these years. So the first thing is to be educated in it all and learning the language. If you get onto if you're ever speaking to a financial advisor, there are so many acronyms and all sorts of ups and downs, and trying to understand the graphs they send you and all these sorts of things. It's definitely a learning curve. But we've been formed and helped very much by the team who work for us. And that's been formative for both myself and for our finance committee who have been part of all of that. It's a very slow but ongoing and hopeful process that leads us to learning so much and maybe just making that little bit of difference. The important thing is that we continue to advocate for change. And if we can do this by our little part in it and be that little pebble that's thrown into the pond and the ripples happen, well, then we're happy to do that part. Thank you to all of you, and thank you to Cheryl for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Sister Kate, for sharing your strategies, particularly in managing investments, to make sure that we are not supporting destructive industries, and also by sharing your learnings in this journey that you are into. And thanks for the reminder that we need to continue to advocate for change. Thanks a lot, Sister Kate. And so we move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is from Australia as well. So Chris Hill is the Environmental Sustainability Manager for the Institute of the Sisters of Mercy of Australia and Papua New Guinea. And he provides specialist leadership and technical expertise on environmental sustainability strategies and legislative requirements across the Institute. So previous to this role, Chris was the Director of Environmental Sustainability at the Mater Hospital in Brisbane, where he led the development of an environmental strategy to support the hospital's environmental sustainability platform, and later was recognized with numerous awards, but most notably the Queensland Premier's Award for Sustainability in 2016. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Cheryl. Can I please share my screen? I just don't have access.
Lana, can you please?
Yes, of course. I will provide in the access right now.
Before I start,
Chris, we can't hear you.
Yes, sorry. Yes, I was just going to say thank you, Sister Kate. I could just about replicate exactly everything that you're about to say right now. So thank you very much. I'll just get into this screen here. Can you see that yet? Can you see that screen now?
Okay, yeah, you can see it.
Thank you. So thank you, Cheryl, for the invitation, and thank you to the Laudato Si movement. After hearing Sister Kate, as I said, a lot of what I'm going to say is going to replicate a similar process that we went through as well. So the Institute of the Sisters of Mercy of Australia and Papua New Guinea is approximately 650 sisters within the Institute. We've got approximately 500 properties, and we own a lot of ministries across a wide variety of sectors. So the reason the sisters are about, I guess there's a lot of mission and values in what we do, and certainly our own constitution talks about the connected and vulnerable earth. Laudato Si, of course, talked about polluting fossil fuels and moving to renewables. The Eighth Work of Mercy talked about showing mercy to our common home. The Mercy International Reflection Process talked about the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. Our own chapter statement recognises the degradation of the earth, and that one of the directions to leadership in the Acts of Chapter was to look at environmental sustainability across the Institute. So there was a real drive on being aware of our impact upon the earth community. The sisters were very proactive, and in 2016 launched their integrated approach to sustainable living policy, and they identified a number of objectives across the bottom there, with investment being one of the key areas that they wanted to progress. At the moment, we are revamping this policy and are about to relaunch it in about 2 weeks' time, where we'll have our integral ecology policy, which of course will link in a lot closer to the Laudato Si goals. So this is quite exciting for us. So when we started the process, again, similar to Sister Kate, we had a number of investment policies in place that had a very good framework from a governance perspective, and it did have an approved and excluded investment schedule. And of course, being a large Catholic organisation, there was a lot of values that linked into our mission and the ethics of being in a Catholic institution. So there was a lot of excluded industries around reproductive health, around armaments, pornography and tobacco, for instance. And the policies talked about having an acknowledgement that our fossil fuel investment should be no more than 10%. It was interesting when we started the process, we found that we are actually about 12 to 15% of the portfolio actually was involved with fossil fuels. So even though our original intent with our original policies were to limit it, when we started to measure it more accurately, we found that we were a bit higher. So the push to change, I guess, we had a perfect storm. A lot of things came together at the same time. The sisters of the Institute were very keen on divestment and looking at our investment portfolio. It was mentioned in our sustainable living policy. Laudato Si, of course, very much in favour of it. It also became an agenda item on our Finance Advisory Council. And there was a number of fossil fuel divestment pledges that were emerging, such as the then Global Catholic Climate Movement, now Laudato Si Movement. So there was a lot of reasons why we decided to look at this space. So we again met with our investment partners starting in about February 2018. And this was again over a very long period of time, where we identified that there would be 4 major steps that we want to embed into our thinking. We also acknowledged that we needed education to ourselves and also to our wider sister and staff community. And again, as Sister Kate mentioned, advocacy was a key issue for us to want to be able to talk about this on a wider platform. So we developed a comprehensive document called the Roadmap to Responsible Investing, which did have the 4-step approach. Step 1 was to divest from fossil fuels. Step 2 was to look at the environmental, social governance, values, and ethical factors, again, that Sister Kate mentioned. And then also moving into sustainability themed investing around, sustainable agriculture or clean energy technology, and then also some impact investing, looking at how we might solve social or environmental problems. So the step 1 was trying to get an understanding of what our current fossil fuel investments were and what the carbon footprint of those investments were, and trying to evaluate how we were going to manage exclusions from the current portfolio. We also wanted to develop benchmarks where we could measure the progress of this journey. Some of that formed into the policies that we rewrote, which linked into step 2 around integrating further ESG values and how we were going to exclude or include certain managers of certain fund portfolios. So from a screening perspective, there was a combination of approaches, screening for negative screening, I suppose, where we looked at removing fossil fuel exposure wherever we could, or any values-based ethical screening that we could include. From a positive best in class, we looked at identified performance from an ESG perspective in certain asset classes, and norms-based screening, where we looked at some minimum standards of business practice that are accepted worldwide. So, looking at other companies that might contravene certain conventions, etc. So part of it was understanding how we measure the progress of what we're doing. And at the same time, we were developing a rather robust environmental management plan, which had a number of targets against all of the themes of the sustainable living policy, where we actually identified goals that we could actually measure and against a certain time frame. We're currently now reworking these into the Laudato Si goals as part of the Laudato Si action platform. So again, along with our integral ecology policy, which is coming out shortly, we'll also have a new working document on how we're going to implement the different goals. So from a targets perspective, again, similar to what Sister Kate has already spoken about, we decided to make no new investments in the top 200 oil and gas companies, sell existing direct investments in the top 200 oil, gas and coal companies. We've achieved both of those targets to date. We wanted to invest in climate solutions such as renewable energy, water efficiency, etc. We're in progress with that. We've just started that process. And we wanted to be able to maintain a carbon footprint that was 20% less than the benchmark of our entire portfolio based on tons of CO2 emissions per $1 million invested. So that's been achieved and is ongoing. It changes. We measure that each quarter, and each quarter to date, we have so far met that target. So from a finance impact point of view, we did expect that the removal of the fossil fuel companies such as BHP and Rio did have an initial financial impact, again, expected. But with the COVID market downturn that we had, we didn't feel that we were as impacted so much as the benchmark because of the huge falls that the fossil fuel companies also experienced during that time. But our view is not to look at the short-term variances, but to have the longer-term view, because we are quite confident in the research that's happening and the progress in this space worldwide, that investing this way does equal or sometimes have a better performance relative to normal benchmarks. So we look at this from both a financial and a social return. So what we've achieved so far, carbon at this point in time, so the equities benchmark, which is a mix of all our shares, both domestic and international, our target, as I said, was to achieve 20% less. The quarter to June 21, we're actually 47% less carbon intensive with our investment portfolio than what the benchmark is for that index. We've also just started, as I said, into steps 3 and 4 with our impact and social investing. So we've got allocated up to 5% of our portfolio into this space at this point in time. So again, it's an interim step, but certainly a very positive one. So we're looking at a wide range of solar installations across education, industrials, and energy retailing. And also from a social point of view, some housing projects in Victoria, and some mixed use development for service workers in New South Wales. So again, we're looking at this from a domestic point of view as well. So the communication was quite important. So we wrote lots of articles in lots of our publications. I developed an information sheet that was shared with the sisters. I wrote a case study to get a common understanding, which I believe we shared also with the Global Catholic Climate Movement. And reporting is done monthly through our Finance Advisory Council. I also developed a one-page infographic, which I've shared with Cheryl. Again, it was also shared with the Global Catholic Climate Movement, which just gave a step-by-step guide, but certainly, as Sister Kate said, this didn't start today and finish next week. It's been over a couple of years that we've been working on this. So we were part of one of the earlier global announcements done by the then Global Catholic Climate Movement in May 2019. I'm very happy to be included into that listing. And from an advocacy point of view, we've talked about doing it, and now we want to be able to promote and share that we're actually walking the talk in what we've been doing. So we have actually signed a number of different pledges, the Laudato Si Movement now, the Fossil Fuel Free Pledge, the Catholic Impact Investing Pledge, and the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. So we're certainly trying to showcase that we are well aware of what's out there, and we want to be part of the change. When we're talking about what's happening out there, is not a week goes by that you don't see a news item from somewhere talking about something in this space. So it certainly is a non-stop and topical point of discussion everywhere. And when we're looking at who is divesting, it's really no surprise that it is the faith-based organisations that are the biggest sector, with up to 35% making up the majority of the divestment movement. And that's because I think it links in very strongly with our mission and values in the faith sector. So there is some further information. Again, some of this is all available on the web, how to divest for institutional investors, principles for responsible investment, and Responsible Investment Association of Australasia all have handy hints and step-by-step guides to help you through this process. So I'm happy again to talk with you and take some questions later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris, for sharing your very comprehensive strategy. It's really very inspiring. For those of you who would like the copy of the infographics, which Chris has mentioned, I will be sending it over along with the recording after maybe next week. So I'd like to ask Sister Prema to introduce our next speaker. Sister Prema, are you here?
Yeah. Last time someone had muted me. I couldn't come to. So we are happy to listen to Sister Bina. Sister Bina Thomas is an educationist. She taught physics in the senior secondary level and became principal of two of the biggest schools of the Sisters of Notre Dame, the Notre Dame Academy in Patna and Delhi. After that, she served as education coordinator and then as the provincial of Assumption province. Sister Bina currently serves as development officer, alumni coordinator, and manager of the Sisters of Notre Dame School. Sister Bina, welcome to this session. Over to you.
Thank you. Am I audible? Am I audible to all of you?
Yes.
Thank you, Sister Prema, for your warm welcome. And thank you, Cheryl, for inviting me to this session. I am supposed to be sharing our humble contribution in reducing fossil fuels and creating renewable energy, especially how we started the solar in our school in Delhi. Before I go into the topic, I like to share this. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Pope Francis has repeatedly called for a gradual replacement, but without delay of fossil fuels with clean energy sources. In the words of Pope Francis, civilization requires energy, but energy use must not destroy our civilization. Sisters of Notre Dame are also committed to accelerate our action to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 7 for 2030 to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. We as a congregation had been committed to protecting our Mother Earth through our JPIC initiative for more than a decade, because we believed in justice, peace, and integrity of creation. Of course, Laudato Si brought much more awareness. So responding to Laudato Si mandate, Sisters of Notre Dame in India had started several initiatives like rainwater harvesting, solar energy, biogas, and so on to ensure clean, renewable energy for all. I came to Delhi in the year 2018. And as all of you are aware, Delhi has extreme weather conditions with the severe heat and severe cold. The decade 2010 to 2019 was the hottest, with a mean temperature of 0.36 centigrade higher than the average. Heat waves continue to increase, and it is impossible to survive without air conditioners. So that brought a lot of questions for us, what we can do to minimize this rising temperature and to bring a little change in our air. We as a community started reflecting about it, and we knew that solar power in India is a fast developing industry as part of the renewable energy. But being the capital, we have many limitations, especially in installing ground-mounted solar power points. So when we looked about it, we found out that we have a larger roof for our residents as well as for our school. And we do not have to take extra ground space. So we started looking at possibilities of why not go for solar energy. The panels are eco-friendly. We were conscious about the initial investment, but we also realized that ultimately the power bill will come down. So some of these thoughts led us to the new initiative, which in fact is a natural outgrowth of values nurtured by the congregation over the years. Sisters of Notre Dame that sees nature as sacred and always moves toward environmental stewardship, keeping in mind that we all need to do our part in protecting our Mother Earth and caring for our creation. We started inquiring about the process, the finance involved, subsidies available, and the agencies who take up this job. We also tried to get more information and reviews from social media. Then more or less we finalized that we are going to set up our solar panels on the roof. Roof solar panels are not so very much popular in homes now, and especially in an area where we are in a rural place, we don't see this, but we had decided. So what are the actions we took? We hired a certified professional to get the job done. They came and studied the electricity bills for 12 months, studied the current needs and the future needs, and made the suggestions accordingly. They also briefed us the types of solar power available for home and school. We opted for a solar power where the system is connected to the grid without any backup. We found that was cheaper and also easy to maintain. The panels were installed considering the units consumed and unit needed. You will see some of the initiatives by the coming next 2-3 slides. This is our Notre Dame convent in Patna, partially solarized. You will also see a very rural village in Bihar, Gehri, where the health center is fully solarized. And Gehri convent partially solarized. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Gehri is really a very interior village. And to accomplish something like this is a big investment towards clean energy. Now you come to Notre Dame Convent, Delhi, fully solarized. And this is our Notre Dame School in Delhi, again, fully solarized. We realized in our process that there has to be a right balance between electricity generation and consumption. On excess generation, the power is given to the grid. And when we run short, we get power from the grid. So it was like an exchange. It is not that we did not have any challenges. One of the first challenges was to convince every member that this is going to help. Personally, I am passionate about whatever little we can do, we must all do to save our beautiful planet. So this might be a little thing that we can do. We also had problem getting credible and objective sources of information. There were policy inconsistencies, ill-designed government structures, distorted technical challenges, and also we had our doubts about the producing capacity of the panels, since we were experimenting in a big way for the entire school and the convent. We also felt that once it is set, the investment or the money that's spent will come back ultimately. And so with the initial challenges, problems, we went ahead and we definitely learned a lot. I like to share some of the learnings which we had through the next slide. Solar energy is clean and renewable energy source. It is pollution free and causes no greenhouse emission. The panels clean up our air. Renewable clean power is available every day of the year, even cloudy days. It produces some power. Once a solar panel is installed, solar energy can be produced free of charge. Return on investment, like paying our utility bill. Solar panel also increases our property value. India is a fast developing industry in solar power as part of renewable energy. There is a lot government push, although that is mainly 70% of that is for industries and commercial purposes. But the religious and faith-based institutions are definitely doing their part, living up Laudato Si action plan. Today, we feel satisfied because apart from being cost effective, we are able to spread the message of protecting the environment by adapting this renewable form of energy. The students who come into our school, our collaborators, our teachers, our parents, they come from a very rural area. It is a learning experience for them, and through their medium, we are able to reach out to many. I believe seeing is believing, and for them, it is a lesson beyond seeing. And as Sisters of Notre Dame, we are committed to do as much as possible wherever we are. This is in the form of sharing our struggles, our challenges, and the initiatives that we took, the steps that we followed, and the learnings that we would like to share with all of you. I thank you for giving me a chance to share our little contribution in adding to creating renewable energy. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Sister Bina, for inspiring us with the long-standing initiatives of the Sisters of Notre Dame in India in supporting clean and renewable energy. I am also very happy that we have us here Father Harlem Gozo, the Director of Social Action Center of the Diocese of Maasin in the Philippines. They were recently in the Vatican News as being the first diocese in the world to shift to solar energy. Father Harlem, can you give us a few words?
Hi everyone. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Laudato Si Movement, for inviting me over. I am speaking. My name is Harlem Gozo from the Diocese of Maasin. I am speaking on behalf of our Bishop Precioso Cantillas of this part of the country. Now, I am unfortunate enough that the speaker before, Mr. Bina, is already sharing. We have more or less the same experience. So thank you, India, for Sister Bina, for the enlightenment and also the lessons learned. Now, just to make our story brief, because it has already been said many times over about the environment and so on, would like to share a little bit of our how the workings of our bishop move about in this diocesan plan for solar power. And so before 10 years ago, 10 kVA of energy from the sun costs about $24,000. And that's a lot because we are just a poor diocese. Now, it is about $15,000, the 10 kVA. I don't know about, I am not that competent about the electric terms, but just to see that, just to express that there is a little reduction in the cost of solar power energy. And in our diocese, we were able to meet with the solar power provider, our investment partner in the solar energy. And there was a challenge because priests are also doubtful about this kind of investment. And they were talking about how are we going to reduce our cost of electricity. Now, our bishop is explaining that the solar panels has or have about 25 years of lifetime. And in 15 years, it will be turned over to us. So we have about 10 years free of electricity. The first phase of the plan is for the whole diocese to become solar powered. But of course, not every parish in the diocese is fully solarized. Only a partial solarization because we do not have batteries, very expensive batteries. So our solar energy comes from directly from the sun. It will be used, or it is used only during daylight when there is the sun. And the second phase, the first phase of the plan is for the whole diocese, the entire diocese. Second phase is for all the households. And also we are hoping for the net metering law to be implemented or yes, to be implemented in our region. The net metering law would harvest our excess power from our homes and from our diocesan structures, parishes, and our convents and our diocesan schools, in order to get to the in order to reduce our cost of electricity, because we cannot do away with altogether with the grid, because our energy comes directly from the sun. We are using the solar only during the daylight. And so, but the good thing is that they are paying less, 20% less from our local power provider, or we call it our local electric cooperative in this region. Now, with that, we are looking forward that after 15 years, after we have our installments, we pay our solar power provider on installment basis every month, and after 15 years it will be turned over to us. And the vision of our bishop of the diocese is that 10 years where we have our free electricity, our 45 parishes would earn about $13,500 per month. So that would be the looking forward, after 15 years, that the diocese will benefit. So, but the challenge now is our funds. But our solar power provider did not require us any cash out. So that's the come on, with the program. There is no cash out, but so what we invest are only our existing parishes, our rooftops, our churches, our schools, our convents. So, and they install solar panels up there. And but we have to, of course, we have to pay the solar power provider, our investment partner, for 15 years. Now, also the challenge that we have is our government support. We'd like to, hopefully, our net metering law would come into fruition, so that, as I have said, our excess power will be sold to other consumers, or as a reduction of our electric cost. But the prospect is enormous, ecologically. I will not say it again because Sister Bina has already said it. Economically, and also the awareness of the people. We see our neighborhood are looking up to our parishes. When they see our solar panels, they were also interested, and some of them installed on their own. So hopefully, this solar power will get viral in our diocese, and please help us pray for that. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you, Father Harlem, for sharing the Maasin Diocese experience, which also highlighted the importance of partnership with private sector in your case, and the awareness which it brought to the people in your parish. So yeah, thank you so much for your time today and for inspiring us with the story of Maasin Diocese. If you could stay, we will have Q&A in a few minutes. But before our question and answer, I'd like to invite my colleague Lana to speak a few minutes about the upcoming divestment announcement. Lana?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here, just 1 minute, as Laudato Si Movement representative. So I will be now sharing my quick presentation with you. So I am Zero Fossil Fuel Campaign Manager for Laudato Si Movement, and you always can reach me with additional questions of how to divest, of with support, or where to find some trustee investment officer. And please reach out to me. You have my contacts on the left of the presentation. We will send you it a bit later, just in case, to know who I am and why I am presenting this. So looking forward to receive some letters and messages from you. I will be happy to support you in divestment. But why we divest? I not just going into many details. I would say that's highly moral choice for us, as for people of faith, for Catholics, and for those who believe in a better world where we won't anymore hear the cry of the poor. And this divestment, taking money off the fossil fuel companies, same time is taking the social license from those companies who are destroying the nature and biodiversity, because we are still keeping money in them. Some of us, for example, those who still have money, they secure fossil fuel industry to deliver the destruction on the whole planet. For example, at the ECOP, for example, coal plants in Indonesia, this is a big problem, and many, many others. We can always reinvest into renewable energy, and this needs to be done, as our previous speakers have talked quite a lot, and this is really very important, because there are companies that really sustainable and green, and of course there is some place to put the money after divestment, but we won't discuss it in details today. I will just say that up to date 254 Catholic institutions divested already, and we plan next divestment announcement on October 26th. We will invite every one of you join, and a bit later, please take a look. I will just show what divestment types you can register at our website. For example, this is a coal only, coal and tar sands and partial divestment, when you make a binding commitment to divest across asset classes from some fossil fuel companies, coal, oil, and natural gas. Full divestment, of course, that's the best option, because you are obliged to sell all fossil fuel assets during the 5 years after you develop a sustainable finance plan with the investment officer. And the last, fossil free, it's very symbolic. It's very symbolic divestment commitment. If you don't maintain any money, any assets in fossil fuels, this is great to let others know that you are fossil free, that you will never invest, and you are not maintaining the assets in fossil fuels right now. It means a lot for aspiration of other communities around the world, because not every institution actually has some funds to divest. So yes, if you are not maintaining fossil fuel assets, please just register commitment for going fossil free. And next one is this. We are so pleased to name the institutions in Asia, Oceania who divested already. You can see them all now. We are very proud these institutions, respectful institutions, to join in a global call for divestment and responding to divestment guidance from Vatican, which we've got last year. It's also in our website, and you can always reach and find some more information at Laudato Si website. This is the guidance we prepared for ethical investments in the era of climate change, which consists of videos, additional documents, arguments for divestment. And more closely, you can just try, connect, and join the dots before then commit to divest and sign the Catholic Fossil Free Pledge or the full divestment pledge, as we've just seen different kinds of divestment, and implement the policy when it will be approved, and when then she will be implemented, and there are some KPIs for that, and report and review, because it requires follow through over an extended period of time. Next joint divestment announcement we planned before COP26 with the global divestment movement. If you will register at our website, please also include your quote from your institution if you would like to be mentioned in some press releases, in media outreach. We will be happy to let others know and invite you for our events to speak directly of how you did divest it and why you make this moral and ethical choice, which is very important. Let us dare to dream of a world without fossil fuels. That's possible, that's doable. Let's divest, let's invest into green energy. And we are waiting for you with on divestment commitment. Salamat, terima kasih, thank you.
Thank you, Lana. So we hope that you will respond to Lana's invitation to announce the investment for those of you who haven't yet on October 26. We look forward to seeing your institutions in that list next time. And we now open the floor to any questions to our panelists. So there's two ways you can do it. You can unmute your microphones and ask directly, or you can also type in the chat box and we will be happy to read it. Okay, we have a first question for Sister Bina from Raul. Raul, would you like to read your question or should I do it for you? Okay, so Sister Bina, the question from Raul is, I read from reports that India is focusing on solar energy. What's now the standing of wastes to energy? Oh, okay, sorry. Sorry.
Can I speak?
Okay, yes, please.
Yeah. Both are considered, but solar energy is taking much more precedence over energy from waste. But that is also being addressed. But India being a populous country like this, it is little slow. But we do take, especially the government is keen, is aware of the damage being done because we are facing climate disasters every year. So there is an added awareness. Government has given a new push, but solar power is going ahead than waste to energy from plants. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Sister Bina. Any other questions for our panelists?
Yes, I have. Can I speak?
Yes, please.
Cheryl?
Yes, please.
Congratulations, Bina. I'm Mudita speaking. I have a question. We have solar panels in our big institutions.
Yeah.
What are the problems or government-wise in the rural areas? How easy or how difficult is it to, you have done it in rural areas.
Yeah.
So how difficult or how easy, and what have been the challenges and the obstacles, both social-wise, from the political angle and from the government angle, in smaller remote areas where we have our mission stations?
There were challenges. The government machinery moves very slow. They have good practices, but it is not being carried out. To get the government subsidy, one or two people we were not getting. Fortunately, we got a firm which is dealing with the solar energy, who was a student of one of the Catholic schools. And once we came to her, she was very helpful. I must say she went out of her way to connect. Even after the entire work is done, it took almost 4-5 months to get the government to come and put the grid connection, the net meter connection. Meanwhile, we were paying electricity. At one point, she said, we were concerned, but she said, you do not pay any more bill. It was the lockdown time in 2020, and no phone calls they will answer. But the last July, I must say, I went from here to the electricity office in Delhi, which is quite far. We reached there, we need to find people. The security guard will not allow anyone to go inside because of the pandemic. I said, at my age, I traveled such a distance, so I will not go back without getting the answer, or I have to talk to. Luckily, they gave a phone number of an officer. Standing outside the gate of the big office, I talked to him. He took my email ID and phone number. He said he will attend to my letters. And I must say, after I reached home, I was happy to find how gracious this officer was. He would attend to my call, and the money that we paid for 5 months, he said, we will adjust.
Ooh.
And it was a very positive experience after a couple of months. I can send a mail telling I'm happy to find government officers with such refinement and quality, and I could call him up anytime. That was my experience. Thank you, Modita.
Great, great. Congratulations. You were persevering and you succeeded in a big mission with government people. Wonderful. Great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Beena.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And so for those who would like to ask questions, please feel free to unmute your microphones and ask our panelists directly. Brenda here is sharing her appreciation. Capacity building in integral economics is a big challenge for the church, and you are playing a critical role. So congratulations, everyone, and thank you, Brendan.
Can I ask a
Any other
question
questions? Please take this chance to learn. Yes, please, Joe.
To our two Australian presenters, I'm sorry, I'm possibly embarrass you, but as you know, our Deputy Prime Minister is reportedly a Catholic, and yet is fiercely resistant to any actions at all against climate change. Comments, please.
Yes, I don't wish to make a political statement on behalf of the Institute of the Sisters of Mercy, but certainly in terms of climate change, those in the know talk about a transition away from coal, whereas I think everyone seems to think that we're going to turn coal off immediately. We want to turn coal off today and start renewables tomorrow. What we need is a long-term plan with political support to look at a long-term transition from fossil fuels into renewables with care and concern, obviously, for workers in that sector. So that's just a rather generic response there, Joe, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chris.
And I concur with Chris.
Thank you, Sister Kate. And Sue is raising her hand. Sue, would you like to speak?
Hi, yeah, I'd love to. Thanks so much, everyone. I'm a British lady. I'm a teacher, but living in Wellington, New Zealand here for 20 years. Thank you to you all. I'd like to pay a special thank you to the sisters who gave step-by-step instructions. And like Sister Beena spoke about, the hope and patience, you know, it's one step at a time. It's a long journey. For instance, in New Zealand, I don't know what it's like in other places, but even though we've had solar panels on order for 6 months, they've been delayed, but they will be coming in November. I agree with you all when, like, the fact that we are trying one step at a time, it does all work out. For instance, once we've got solar, we haven't got a battery because batteries, the technology isn't there yet, but once we've got the solar up, it will charge the car, you know, it'll charge the account. We can then feed it back into the grid. We will be energy producers. I think a lot of you referred to that. So not only will we be cleaner, but we'll also be giving energy back to other places, you know, who haven't got energy, and that feels good too. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Sue, any other questions for our wonderful panelists? there's a question on chat. Will the Catholic Church support the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons? I do not have the answer now. But if anybody from the panelists would know the answer to this question, but we will get back to you, Bernadette. We'll find out more. So if there's
one more question.
Yeah,
Can
sister.
I,
Yes.
to Father Harlem. Did you get any sponsors for your archdiocese with regard to finances to putting up these solar panels? Did you get finances, or did you work within your own archdiocese? And are there places like Caritas and other such church organizations who fund these solar energy projects? And could you give us some examples?
Yeah, thank you, sister. Yeah, we are working on our own. We do not have any partners in terms of our own investments. But aside from the solar power provider, on our own, but there is no cash out anyway. So what we have are our diocesan buildings, our structures, churches. On our churches, at the rooftops, there are solar power panels. And other dioceses, I don't know, but they are also working on it. They are asking questions. But surely the message of solar energy comes across the entire country, I think so.
You did it with your own finances, which is the archdiocesan finances, not with donations from abroad or funding agencies.
No, sister. No, sister. We pay the solar power provider on installment basis for 15 years, monthly.
Fine. Thank you.
The solar technology is, although it has reduced drastically in the decade, but it is still a very high investment cost. Thank you.
Thank you. 15 years installments. Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Going once, twice, twice. Okay. So at this point, I would like to thank Alessandro, Jerry, Sister Kate, Sister Bina, Father Harlem for inspiring us and for sharing with us your very rich experience and insights from which we have learned a lot. So thank you to my co-host, Sister Prema, and to my colleague, Lana. And thank you everyone for learning with us today. Before we close, Sister Prema might be ready with like a short synthesis of what we have discussed. We have taken a lot of, we had a long discussion from Alessandro to Father Harlem, and Sister Prema, can you do a short synthesis of before we close the session?
Oh, yes. So, yes. Everybody actually insisted on the divestment theme, which is very encouraging with the several examples. But before I go, I would like to quote Thomas Insua, the Executive Director of Global Catholic Climate Movement, said, "Every dollar invested in fossil fuels is a vote for suffering. These institutions are taking prophetic action to light the way towards a more just and sustainable future, because now more than ever, we need to protect our communities and build a just recovery together." Based on this, everybody has spoken, and Alessandro definitely said that 80% of greenhouse gases are emitted by fossil energy, which brings dramatic climate change, which is the biggest challenge for us today. And I would like to highlight the way that they said they want to reach out by 2050 They want to using the clean energy completely in
Hello? I will call you
their
back.
own institution.
I'll call you back.
And push innovation and
I'm at a
technology is
meeting.
their mission. That is something to be highlighted. And they also spotted out the steel and cement companies, the way that using the high level of energy consumption and the pollution that they are contributing. I also like to highlight in his speech, 5% of the cars only run by electricity today. They are trying to push that towards 60% of electric cars, which is really very challenging. At the same time, that is really the divestment. And coming to Jerry's points, Jerry also highlighted the same on divestment of divestment, and then the Center for Energy, Ecology and Development, CED, is they showed 7,000 islands are in danger, coral reefs are in danger, and deforestation, typhoon, loss of coral reef, all these are really affecting our nature, affecting our life itself. So the urgency of divestment. And they have also really recognized the coal used by the domestic workers. And they have aimed at that and reduced the use of coal, and they have given replaced with the clean energy. And every Catholic institutions are trying towards this, to divest from unclean energy to the clean energy. That's also is something very, very enlightening. And they are also trying to reach their future goal is their step forward is that zero coal use by 2037. Kate is also described the little steps that they make to divest the finance. And they have also made strategies to move from investment on coal, gas, oil to the clean energy. Churchill also the same. He also spoke about the policies that they are taking and trying to live the Laudato Si values, especially the mercy, the sisters of mercy. The mercy itself is mercy towards the common home. And they are trying to educate people and take steps towards advocacy. That are very, very novel steps that they are taking. And by and large, I feel that educating the common people is very, very important. And approaches towards the different approaches they have taken towards divestment, integrating values of ESG and ethical values in people and their SMART goals. These are all very to be highlighted here, and for us to take our projects forward with this. And they have also achieved to remove some of the companies that are using the fossil fuel. That was a great achievement, and they do we do recognize that and appreciate the great step that they have taken up. And Sister Bina, definitely, she has come down to the earth, how a common man can use divest and invest in clean energy, and having the rainwater harvesting, especially the solar energy panels, which in India we are trying to do it. And the difficulties, the challenges that she faced, how she tried to overcome that, and how it can definitely reduce our energy bill. That's definitely helping the poor people, the common people who are, as we said, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor are one and the same. So these are some of the real highlights in the talks. So divestment is a moral imperative to help God's creation. This is what we have to keep in mind, that every Catholic should take a step towards this, to use the clean energy and bring down the global temperature and take care of the common home. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Prema. And with that, we are ready to close the session with the closing prayer. This is a prayer for divestment. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Creator God, through you all things were made, the stars in the sky, the birds of the air, the breath of life beneath the seas. Beauty surrounds us like a love letter inscribed on this earth. Blessed be your name, but we have not lived up to our vocation as protectors of your handiwork. The earth has been plundered and cries out to us. Through our use of fossil fuels, we have filled the skies with gases which are harming our world, your creation. We know that it is the poor who suffer the most from our actions, and we ask forgiveness. We also know that things can change and that we can embark on new paths, restoring our common home and clearing the skies. We pray that those who have decision-making powers will divest from the fossil fuel industry, challenging big corporations to leave behind this era of destruction and pollution. We pray that political leaders make way for affordable forms of clean energy for all. We ask that workers be treated fairly as we make this transition. Move the hearts of those who seek only profit at the expense of the earth and the poor. May we be guided by your spirit in courage and determination. Help us to embrace new possibilities, new sources of energy, and set out on this path of renewal. We ask this through Jesus Christ, your Son. Amen. Saint Francis of Assisi, pray for us. Again, thank you, Alessandro, Jerry, Sister Kate, Chris, Sister Bina, Father Harlem, to my co-host, Sister Prema, and to our mighty translators, Philip and Danu, and to everyone who's here and who stayed on. Thank you very much. Have a good morning, good afternoon, evening. Salamat.
Thank you.
Bye all. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.